She was sitting in the kitchen, with a cup of tea in her trembling hands. I was 38 years old. She was 72. And after 3 decades of silence, my mother was finally going to tell me the truth. My name is Victoria, and this is the story of how I discovered that the life my mother lived was a careful construction of lies. A lie that began out of love. A lie that cost everything. I grew up in a house that seemed normal. My father was a hard-working man. He was a civil engineer. He spent long hours at work. My mother, Margaret, was an elegant woman who took care of the house, took care of me and my younger brother, Thomas. Life seemed stable, normal, uncomplicated. But there was something I always noticed. My parents slept in separate rooms. They said it was because of my father's snoring. My parents rarely touched in front of us. When my father came home, he didn't kiss my mother. He simply greeted her with a nod of his head. At 18, I asked my mother if she loved my father. She simply smiled and said, "Love is complicated, Victoria. There are many types of love." That answer haunted me for 20 years. When my father died at 78, my mother didn't cry at the funeral. She was composed. Almost relieved. Within 2 months, she sold the house. Within 6 months, she moved to a small apartment in a different neighborhood of the city. She had cut contact with many friends. She had changed her phone number. I thought she was having an emotional breakdown. I offered for her to come live with me. She gently refused. "I'm fine, Victoria. In fact, I'm better than I've ever been." At that time, I was busy with my own life. I was working as a lawyer. I had a husband. I had 2 small children. I visited my mother once a month, but our meetings were brief. She always seemed happy. But there was something different about her. A freedom I had never seen before. When my mother was 72, she asked me to have lunch alone with her. Without my husband. Without my children. Just the 2 of us. We went to an Italian restaurant that she chose. A place I had never been. A place away from downtown, in a quiet neighborhood. When we sat down, my mother ordered wine. Something she never did. She looked at me with those blue eyes she gave me, and she said, "Victoria, I need to tell you a story. A story I should have told a long time ago. A story that will explain many things about who I am." She took a sip of wine and began. "I met your father when I was 19. He was a handsome man. Ambitious. He had plans to build an empire. I was in love with him. Or at least, I thought I was. I married him when I was 21. But I soon discovered that something was wrong. Your father was a very controlling man. He didn't like me having friends. He didn't like me talking to my family. He monitored every penny I spent. He humiliated me in front of other people. And worse, he wasn't faithful. I discovered, 3 years after our marriage, that he had a mistress. A woman who worked in his office. When I confronted your father about this, he made me a proposal. He said I could choose. Leave him and face the scandal of a divorce, or stay. If I stayed, he promised the situation would stop. That he would end the affair. I believed him. Or rather, I didn't believe him, but I was too afraid to leave him. My mother paused. She took another sip of wine. "You need to understand the context of the time, Victoria. This was in 1962. A divorced woman didn't have many options. Especially a woman who had no income of her own, who had been raised to be a wife. I had no professional skills. I had you and Thomas depending on me. The fear was paralyzing. I held my mother's hand. She continued. So I did what your grandmother taught me to do. I pretended. I pretended I was happy. I pretended I loved your father. I pretended I didn't know about the other women. Because, you see, there were others. Many others. But then, when you were 5 and Thomas was 3, I met someone. His name was Daniel. He was the new neighbor who moved to the street next door. He was a widower. His children were grown and lived in another state. He was kind. He was everything your father wasn't. One afternoon, when I was walking with you and Thomas in the park, Daniel was there with his dog. You wanted to play with the dog. He helped us. We talked for hours. I laughed more that day than I had laughed in years. After that day, our meetings in the park became regular. It wasn't planned. It always seemed like coincidence. But eventually, we realized it was planned. That we were both returning to the park at the same time, hoping to find each other. We started talking. Really talking. About our dreams. Our pains. Our frustrations. Daniel knew I was married. I was honest about that from the beginning. But he also knew I was unhappy. And he offered nothing but company. Being heard. One day, Daniel kissed me. It happened in the park, under a tree, when you and Thomas were playing. He asked permission first. May I? I had never been asked what I wanted by a man. Your father never asked. I kissed Daniel. And in that moment, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in years. Tears were running down my mother's face. If you're as absorbed as I was in that moment, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Stories about forbidden love, about sacrifice and about lives lived secretly, are powerful. And I need your support to continue sharing these real narratives. And in the comments, tell me, where are you watching from? Write your city and country. I love knowing where these stories reach. Now let's find out what happened with my mother and her forbidden love. The affair with Daniel lasted 30 years, my mother continued. It wasn't a traditional affair. We never lived together. We never traveled together. We were never seen publicly as a couple. But we saw each other regularly. Sometimes in the park. Sometimes in a cheap motel in a distant neighborhood. Sometimes just in his apartment, when your father was working and you were at school. For 30 years, I lived two lives. One life as Robert's wife. One life as Daniel's lover. A public life where I was Margaret, the good wife, the good mother. A secret life where I was someone who was loved. You might be wondering if your father found out. The answer is complicated. I think that, on some level, he knew. There were moments when he looked at me with an expression that was hard to describe. Suspicion mixed with relief. Because, you see, while I was with Daniel, I stopped demanding attention from your father. I stopped trying to make him happy. I stopped trying to save him. And that, paradoxically, made our marriage easier. Because we both had what we wanted outside the home. My mother paused again. When your father started getting sick, Daniel and I had a conversation. He asked me if I wanted to leave Robert. Start a new life with him. I was old. I was 65. I still had time to be happy, completely happy, without lies. Because, you see, after 30 years living with Robert, I had developed a form of love for him. Not the romantic kind of love. But a kind of love founded on shared intimacy. Knowing every detail of someone. Their habits. Their fears. Their way of being in the world. Besides, there was you. And Thomas. How would you react if your mother left with a man when your father was dying? How would your reputation be damaged? I had protected you and Thomas from so much during my life. I couldn't hurt you now. So what did you do? I asked my mother. I ended my affair with Daniel. I ended it. We saw each other one last time, 6 months before your father died. We said goodbye properly. We cried. We loved each other one last time. And then, it was over. Do you regret it? I asked. My mother looked at me for a long time. Victoria, I lived 30 years of my life in secret. I lied every day. I did things that would hurt you and Thomas if you knew. But I also experienced love. Real love. Despite the suffering that came with keeping it secret. If I could travel back in time, knowing everything I know now, I don't know if I would change anything. Because the choices I made created who I am. They created you. They created Thomas. Yes, they were built on lies. But they were real too. If you're disturbed, confused, and questioning everything you thought you knew about relationships, leave a like and keep following the channel. And in the comments, tell me, do you think my mother did the right thing? Where are you watching from? Write your city and country. Because now comes the most complicated part of the story. After my mother finished her story, I didn't know how to feel. I was furious. I was hurt. I was confused. Because everything I thought I knew about my family was based on a lie. I spent 2 weeks without talking to my mother. My husband noticed. He asked what had happened. I couldn't tell him. How do you explain to someone that your mother had a 30-year affair? But eventually, my emotions calmed down enough for me to think clearly. And when I thought clearly, I realized something. My mother had sacrificed her life for mine. For Thomas's. For our reputation. For our happiness. She had kept a secret for 30 years to protect us from truths that would hurt us. She had given up a love that evidently meant everything to her because she felt it was her duty as a mother. So I called her. And I apologized. Mom, I'm sorry for my reaction. I'm angry, yes. But I also have admiration. You did a terrible thing. You lived a lie. But you did it out of love. And now that I'm grown, now that I have my own husband, my own children, I understand that relationships are complex. That sometimes we do things that aren't right to protect the people we love. My mother cried when she heard this. Do you forgive me? She asked. I'm not there yet, I answered honestly. But I will be. Because now I understand that you didn't betray me. You protected me. A year has passed since my mother told me the truth. I've visited her regularly. I've heard stories about Daniel. Stories I had never heard. Stories about how he wrote her love letters that she kept in a box under her bed. How he gave her small gifts that she kept in a special closet. How he whispered promises of a future they both knew they would never have. My mother received a letter from Daniel. He was dying. Cancer. He had no children to tell. So he wrote to my mother. 2 pages. In it, he wrote about how 30 years with her had been the most significant thing in his life. How he would have waited for her eternally. How he died happy, knowing he had loved and been loved. My mother kept that letter in a frame. Not a frame where she could see it, but a frame turned backward, so when she looked back at the life she lived, she could see those words. Today, my mother is 80 years old. She's even more beautiful than she was before. There's a peace in her that I had never seen. A sense that she can finally be honest with herself about who she is. She often tells me, Victoria, life is too short to live as a lie. But sometimes, the lies we tell others allow us to tell the truth to ourselves. People, if you've made it this far on this emotional journey of a woman who lived 30 years in secret, of a forbidden love, of sacrifice and finally of acceptance, I want to thank you from my heart. Stories about complicated love, about unconventional relationships, about gray morality, are important to be told. If this story touched you, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Share it with people you think need to hear that relationships are more complicated than they seem. That sometimes the people we love most do things we can't understand. And in the comments, tell me, do you think my mother did the right thing? Do you judge her for her affair? Or do you understand that sometimes the heart leads us to places the mind cannot justify? Also write your city and country. I want to know where this story reached. It's always exciting to discover. And always remember, we judge quickly because we don't understand the complete story. But when we understand all the pain, all the complexity, all the sacrifice behind a choice, our capacity for compassion grows. My mother taught me this. Through her lies, she taught me about truth. Through her secret, she taught me about honesty. Through her double life, she taught me that being human means making impossible choices.